The Falkland Islands, a windswept archipelago in the South Atlantic Ocean, became the focal point of a sudden and intense conflict in 1982. For centuries, the islands had been a subject of dispute between Britain and Argentina, with both nations claiming sovereignty over the territory. The British had maintained control since 1833, and the Falklands, with their small population of predominantly British descent, had remained a symbol of colonial persistence. However, for Argentina, the islands, known locally as the Islas Malvinas, represented an unresolved historical grievance and a matter of national pride. Tensions over the islands simmered quietly for decades, but flared dramatically in the early 1980s. Argentina, under the military dictatorship of General Leopoldo Galtieri, faced a dire economic crisis and growing domestic discontent. The regime sought a unifying cause to bolster its sagging popularity, and the Falklands presented an opportunity to rally the Argentine people around a shared nationalistic goal. For Galtieri, reclaiming the islands seemed like a move that would not only strengthen his hold on power, but also elevate Argentina's standing on the world stage. In the weeks leading up to the invasion, Argentina began to escalate its rhetoric, claiming sovereignty more assertively and preparing its military forces for action. On April 2, 1982, the Argentine military launched Operación Rosario, a surprise invasion of the Falkland Islands. Argentine troops swiftly overwhelmed the small contingent of British Royal Marines stationed on the islands. The invasion met little resistance, as the British forces were vastly outnumbered and ill-prepared for a full-scale assault. Within hours, Argentina had established control over the islands, raising their national flag in a bold display of defiance against British authority. The news of the invasion sent shockwaves through the British government and public. For Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the timing was critical. Her administration, already facing its own challenges, including economic struggles and rising unemployment, viewed the invasion as an unacceptable affront to British sovereignty and an attack on her nation's global reputation. Thatcher quickly convened her cabinet and declared that Britain would not stand by while its territory was seized. She promised a decisive response to what she called an act of aggression. The invasion also drew immediate international attention. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, passing Resolution 502, which called for the withdrawal of Argentine forces and urged both nations to seek a peaceful resolution. However, neither side appeared willing to back down. For Argentina, the invasion was a matter of pride and legitimacy. For Britain, it was a test of its resolve and its role as a global power. As Britain began to mobilize its forces, the enormity of the task became clear. The Falkland Islands were more than 8,000 miles away from the British mainland, presenting logistical challenges unlike any the British military had faced since World War II. Nonetheless, public opinion in Britain strongly supported military action. Thatcher's government announced the formation of a naval task force, marking the beginning of a massive effort to reclaim the islands. In those tense early days of April 1982, both nations entrenched themselves in their positions. For Argentina, the invasion was celebrated as a national triumph, with jubilant crowds filling the streets of Buenos Aires. But behind the scenes, Galtieri's government faced significant diplomatic pressure and the looming reality of British military intervention. Meanwhile, in Britain, Thatcher emerged as a determined leader, her government framing the conflict as a matter of principle. The Falklands War had begun, and it would soon become one of the most dramatic and consequential episodes in modern British history. The British government's response to the Argentine invasion of the Falkland Islands was swift and resolute. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, often referred to as the Iron Lady, made it clear that Britain would not tolerate such a breach of its territorial sovereignty. The loss of the Falklands was more than just a strategic blow. It was a symbolic challenge to Britain's status as a global power and its commitment to protecting its overseas territories. This resolve set in motion a massive military operation to reclaim the islands, one of the most ambitious undertakings in Britain's post-World War II history. The task facing Britain was daunting. The Falkland Islands were over 8,000 miles away, far beyond the range of easy logistical support. Unlike conflicts in Europe or the Middle East, the South Atlantic offered no nearby friendly bases to launch operations. Every aspect of the campaign, from troop deployment to supply chains, had to be carefully planned and executed. Despite these challenges, Britain's leadership believed that retaking the islands was essential. not only to restore its territorial integrity, but also to reaffirm its standing in the world. The cornerstone of Britain's response was the formation of a naval task force, an operation that mobilized the Royal Navy and other branches of the armed forces on an unprecedented scale. Within days of the invasion, ships and personnel were being prepared for deployment. The aircraft carriers HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible were at the center of the task force, providing vital air support for what was expected to be a grueling campaign. Accompanying them were destroyers, frigates, supply ships, and submarines, as well as troops from the British Army and Royal Marines. The task force also included logistics and support units to ensure that the operation could sustain itself in the remote and hostile environment of the South Atlantic. Public support for the military effort was strong. The British press played a significant role in rallying the nation, with headlines calling for the defense of the Falklands and portraying the invasion as a test of Britain's resolve. The government's firm stance resonated with a population eager to see their country stand strong in the face of aggression. For Thatcher, the conflict was not only a matter of national pride, but also a chance to solidify her leadership during a politically turbulent time. As preparations continued, diplomatic efforts ran parallel to military planning. The United Nations had called for a peaceful resolution, and both Britain and Argentina engaged in talks through intermediaries. However, neither side was willing to compromise. For Argentina, the invasion was framed as the rightful reclamation of what they considered their own territory. For Britain, negotiating from a position of weakness was unthinkable. With diplomacy faltering, the focus shifted increasingly toward military action. The logistics of deploying a task force to the South Atlantic were formidable. The fleet had to travel thousands of miles through treacherous seas, facing potential threats from both Argentine forces and the challenging weather conditions. Aircraft carriers like HMS Hermes carried Harrier jump jets, which would play a crucial role in providing air cover during the conflict. Meanwhile, submarines like HMS Conqueror patrolled the waters, ready to engage Argentine naval forces. Support ships carried essential supplies, from food and fuel to ammunition and medical equipment, ensuring that the fleet could sustain itself during what was expected to be a prolonged campaign. As the task force departed British waters, it became a symbol of national determination. Images of ships leaving port, their crews waving to cheering crowds, were broadcast around the world, reinforcing the message that Britain was ready to fight for its sovereignty. The operation also highlighted the adaptability and resourcefulness of the British military. For instance, civilian ships were requisitioned and repurposed to support the effort, including the famous liner SS Canberra, which transported troops to the front lines. The journey to the Falklands was not without its tensions. Argentine forces were aware of the approaching task force and prepared to counter its advance. Both sides understood the strategic importance of controlling the seas and skies around the islands. For Britain, maintaining air superiority and securing supply lines were critical to the success of the operation. Argentine air and naval forces posed a significant threat, particularly their Exocet missiles, which could target and destroy British ships from long range. Despite these challenges, the morale of British forces remained high. Military personnel understood the significance of their mission and were motivated by the knowledge that they were defending their nation's interests. Training and preparation became key priorities during the voyage, with soldiers and sailors rehearsing scenarios they might face upon arrival. The harsh conditions of the South Atlantic, with its freezing temperatures and rough seas, added another layer of complexity to the mission. Nonetheless, the British task force pressed on, determined to reach the islands and begin the process of reclaiming them. As the fleet approached the Falklands, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the resolve and capability of both nations. For Britain, the operation was a demonstration of its ability to project power across great distances and assert its influence in the face of adversity. The task force was more than a collection of ships and soldiers. It was a statement of national determination. While the challenges ahead were immense, Britain's leadership believed that the principles at stake, sovereignty, freedom, and justice, were worth the risks. The Falklands War was no longer just a territorial dispute. It had become a defining moment in Britain's modern history. The battle for the Falkland Islands was one of determination, strategy, and resilience in a harsh and unforgiving environment. As the British task force approached the islands, the conflict escalated from a political standoff to full-scale warfare. For both Britain and Argentina, This was a critical test of military capability, and neither side was willing to yield. The stakes were high, as control of the islands hung in the balance. The battles that unfolded in the air, at sea, and on the ground were marked by heroism, ingenuity, and devastating losses. The war began in earnest with a fierce naval confrontation. British forces aimed to establish a maritime exclusion zone around the Falklands, effectively cutting off Argentine resupply efforts. The Royal Navy's submarines played a pivotal role, particularly HMS Conqueror, which scored a decisive victory early in the conflict. On May 2, 1982, Conqueror torpedoed and sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano. This controversial action, which resulted in significant loss of life, effectively neutralized the Argentine Navy. While it provoked international criticism, the sinking demonstrated Britain's resolve and shifted the naval balance in the South Atlantic. The loss of General Belgrano forced Argentina to adopt a more defensive posture at sea, but the skies over the Falklands remained fiercely contested. Argentina's air force posed a formidable challenge, utilizing French-made Mirage jets and Super-Attended aircraft armed with Exocet missiles. These missiles proved particularly lethal, as demonstrated by the devastating attack on the British destroyer HMS Sheffield. On May 4th, an Exocet struck the ship, causing a massive fire that led to its eventual sinking. The loss of HMS Sheffield was a sobering moment for the British task force, highlighting the vulnerabilities of their ships and the deadly efficiency of Argentine weaponry. Despite these challenges, the British forces adapted quickly, implementing new defensive measures to counter Argentine air attacks. Harrier jump jets, launched from the carriers HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible, became a vital asset in securing air superiority. The Harriers, equipped with advanced heat-seeking missiles and flown by highly skilled pilots, proved effective in dogfights against Argentine aircraft. Their ability to operate in the challenging conditions of the South Atlantic gave the British a critical advantage, gradually diminishing Argentina's air power. While air and naval battles dominated the early stages of the conflict, the campaign's decisive phase unfolded on land. The British forces began their ground operations with the landing at San Carlos Water, a narrow inlet on East Falkland. This amphibious assault, carried out on May 21, 1982, marked the beginning of the ground campaign to retake the islands. The landing was a complex and risky operation, as Argentine forces were well aware of the strategic importance of the area and had heavily fortified nearby positions. As British troops disembarked from landing craft under the cover of darkness, they faced intense resistance from Argentine defenders. Artillery shells and small arms fire rained down on the landing sites, but the British forces pressed forward with determination. Supported by naval gunfire and air cover from Harriers, they established a beachhead and began advancing inland. The success of the landing at San Carlos Water was a testament to the skill and courage of the British forces, but it came at a cost. Argentine air attacks during the operation resulted in the loss of several British ships, including HMS Ardent and HMS Antelope. Once ashore, British forces faced a grueling campaign to capture key positions held by the Argentine army. The terrain of the Falklands, characterized by rugged hills, boggy ground, and freezing temperatures, presented significant challenges. Troops had to carry heavy equipment over long distances, often under fire, and operate in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Despite these difficulties, the British soldiers and Marines pushed forward with determination, engaging in a series of hard-fought battles that would ultimately decide the war. The fighting reached its climax in early June, as British forces closed in on Port Stanley, the capital of the Falklands and the heart of Argentine resistance. Key battles took place at Mount Longdon, Two Sisters, and Mount Tumbledown, where British troops launched night assaults on heavily fortified positions. These battles were characterized by intense close-quarters combat, with soldiers fighting in the dark, often at bayonet range. The bravery and resilience of the British troops were critical in overcoming the entrenched Argentine defenses. Each victory brought the British closer to their ultimate objective, but the cost was high. Casualties mounted on both sides, and the harsh conditions took a heavy toll on morale. Nevertheless, the British forces maintained their momentum, driven by the knowledge that success was within reach. By June 14, 1982, they had surrounded Port Stanley, and the Argentine defenders, realizing that further resistance was futile, began to negotiate surrender terms. The surrender of Argentine forces at Port Stanley marked the end of the conflict and the restoration of British control over the Falkland Islands. For Britain, the victory was a moment of immense national pride, reaffirming its commitment to defending its territory and its people. For Argentina, the defeat was a profound humiliation, leading to political upheaval and the eventual fall of the military regime. The battles for the Falklands showcased the resilience and adaptability of the British armed forces, as well as the bravery of the individuals who fought in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. It was a war fought far from home, under conditions that tested the limits of endurance and ingenuity, but it was a conflict that Britain was determined to win. The Falklands War remains a defining chapter in modern military history, a testament to the power of resolve and the high cost of sovereignty. The British victory in the Falklands War was a moment of profound national pride and relief, but it came with a heavy toll and lasting consequences. On June 14, 1982, Argentine forces in Port Stanley formally surrendered to British troops, marking the end of a 10-week conflict that had gripped the world. The Union Jack was raised over the Falklands once again, signaling the restoration of British sovereignty over the islands. However, the aftermath of the war extended far beyond the South Atlantic, shaping political landscapes, international relations, and the lives of those who had fought in the conflict. For Britain, the victory was seen as a validation of its resolve and military capability. The success of the operation boosted national morale and reinforced Britain's status as a global power willing to defend its territories, no matter the cost. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, whose leadership during the war earned her widespread acclaim, saw her political fortunes revitalized. Before the conflict, her government had faced declining popularity due to economic struggles and rising unemployment. The successful conclusion of the war bolstered her reputation as a decisive and strong leader, contributing to her landslide re-election victory in 1983. The victory also reinvigorated the British military's image. The Falklands War demonstrated the effectiveness of the Royal Navy, Army, and Air Force, as well as the ability to execute complex operations far from home. It underscored the importance of adaptability and innovation in modern warfare. However, the war also exposed vulnerabilities, particularly in Britain's naval defense systems. The loss of ships such as HMS Sheffield, HMS Ardent, and HMS Antelope highlighted the risks posed by advanced missile technology and underscored the need for improved defenses in future conflicts. For the people of the Falkland Islands, the British victory brought relief and a renewed sense of security. The war had transformed their quiet lives into a battleground, with their homes and lands caught in the crossfire. After the conflict, the British government took significant steps to improve the island's infrastructure and economy, recognizing the strategic importance of the territory and the sacrifices made during the war. The Falkland Islanders were granted full British citizenship, and substantial investments were made in education, healthcare, and defense. A permanent military presence was established on the islands to deter any future aggression, ensuring the safety of the population. In Argentina, the defeat had far-reaching consequences. The loss of the war was a national humiliation and a devastating blow to the military dictatorship that had initiated the conflict. General Leopoldo Galtieri, who had led Argentina during the invasion, faced widespread public outrage and was removed from power shortly after the war. The military junta, already weakened by economic mismanagement and human rights abuses, collapsed in the aftermath of the defeat. By 1983, Argentina had transitioned to a democratic government, marking the end of nearly a decade of authoritarian rule. The war also left a complex legacy for Argentina. While the conflict unified the nation temporarily, it also exposed deep flaws in its leadership and military strategy. The Falklands, or Islas Malvinas as they are known in Argentina, remained a potent symbol of national pride and an unresolved issue in the country's foreign policy. Successive Argentine governments have continued to assert their claim to the islands, maintaining the dispute in diplomatic arenas. For many Argentines, the memory of the war is intertwined with a sense of loss and longing for the recovery of the islands. Internationally, the Falklands War had significant implications for global politics. It underscored the challenges of territorial disputes and the potential for small-scale conflicts to escalate into major confrontations. The United States, which maintained close ties with both Britain and Argentina, found itself in a difficult position during the conflict. While officially neutral, the U.S. ultimately provided critical logistical and intelligence support to Britain, reaffirming the strength of the Anglo-American alliance. The war also demonstrated the importance of alliances such as NATO, highlighting the need for cooperation among Western nations in maintaining global security. The human cost of the conflict was substantial. Over 900 people lost their lives, including 649 Argentine soldiers, 255 British personnel, and 3 Falkland Islanders. The loss of life, coupled with the physical and psychological scars left on survivors, remains one of the most poignant aspects of the war's legacy. Veterans from both sides faced significant challenges in the aftermath, including physical injuries, post-traumatic stress, and the struggle to reintegrate into civilian life. In Britain, organizations were established to support veterans, while in Argentina, the treatment of returning soldiers became a point of national reflection and criticism. In the decades since the conflict, the Falklands War has continued to resonate in both Britain and Argentina. Commemorations are held annually to honor those who fought and died, and the war is studied as a case of modern amphibious warfare. The dispute over the islands persists, with Argentina maintaining its claim and Britain reaffirming its sovereignty. However, the focus has largely shifted from military confrontation to diplomatic and economic strategies, with both nations seeking to strengthen their positions on the global stage. For historians and analysts, the Falklands War remains a fascinating and complex event. It was a conflict that blended traditional military tactics with the challenges of modern warfare, fought in one of the most remote and inhospitable regions on Earth. It showcased the determination of two nations, the resilience of individuals, and the profound impact of war on societies. While the immediate battles ended in 1982, the echoes of the conflict continue to shape the narrative of the Falkland Islands and the broader geopolitical dynamics between Britain and Argentina. The victory in the Falklands War marked a turning point for Britain, reinforcing its global influence and national identity. For Argentina, it was a painful but transformative moment that reshaped its political landscape. The legacy of the war is one of pride and sorrow, triumph and loss, and an enduring reminder of the costs and consequences of conflict. As the world reflects on the events of 1982, the lessons of the Falklands War remain as relevant today as they were over 4 decades ago.